So this is carrying on with the students, and we're going to do a little bit more on dependent origination just a little bit further down, and then we will get into some more practical things. And everything is practical in a certain way, but then when we're going to focus more on certain things in a bit deeper manner, and then we get into practical issues a bit more. That's good. Excellent. And Marie, you don't in the morning. You don't actually. If you just bring a coffee, you don't have to ask me about it in the morning. So that should be fine. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So we yesterday we were looking at this idea of Bhava Paṭicca-samuppāda, the idea that existence or continued existence is the condition for birth or rebirth. And I made this point that when we talk about existence in this context, what we actually mean is where your mind is at. Yeah, where is your mind stationed? And what is kind of the thing that your mind is preoccupied with. Yeah, so when you sit down, you kind of have a baseline that your mind tends to go to, and kind of a default almost, which is the establishment of your consciousness when the mind is established. And that is really what we mean by existence in Buddhism. And then existence that carries on into your next life. Yeah. So this is how you can change. Rebirth will vary from one life to the next one, because even though your physical existence is such in this life here, we are human beings, we're physically in this realm, your mental existence can change. And that mental existence then carries over into the future life. And this is why you can get reborn in different realms in this particular way. So your mental state is almost like your accumulated karma. And that is how you can know what your karma is like, is by knowing your accumulated state. Now this idea of existence is also expressed very nicely in a couple of suttas in the Agudra Numerical Discourses 3, number 76 and 77. So I want to have a quick look at those, and before I move on to more of the factors of dependent origination. So this is this sutta of the Agudra 3 and 76. Sorry, 76. And let's have a sip of coffee first of all. It's really hard to drink coffee. Take it up there. Yeah, okay. Take this up while I drink coffee again. Okay. All right. Okay, you have a point. That makes sense. Okay, so this is how this sutta goes. This is actually here is Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of paṭicca-samuppāda. I'm not sure exactly how I ended up with different translations, but that seems how things ended up. But sometimes life is a bit random. We don't really know exactly how things happen there, which kind of makes it interesting, I suppose. And we see that has a different feel to it, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation compared to paṭicca-samuppāda. So this is how it goes. Yeah, then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, Bhante, it is said, existence. In what way, Bhante, is there existence? Yeah, so the idea of Bhava, this 10th factor of dependent origination, is now to be defined. How does the Buddha define this? And this is really why this sutta is interesting in this context. And the Buddha replies that if Ananda, there were no karma, no actions ripening in the sensory realm, would sense sphere existence be discerned? No, Bhante. So, karma ripening in the sensory realm, here you can see they use the word sensory rather than sensual, and you can see how sensory works better, because it is kind of a very broad idea of sensory existence. And so if you don't have a mind state that is interested in that sensory realm, when your mind is kind of thinking about that, the default kind of state of your mind is to be interested in, attached to, and crave for things in that realm. That is kind of your karma. If that were not the case, then would sensory existence be discerned, or you can say be experienced? And experience may be even a better translation here, because that kind of makes it very clear what is going on. Could you experience existence in that realm unless that mind already was kind of established there? Your mind has to be established in that realm for this thing to be experienced, both right here and now mentally, but also in a sense of rebirth, being actually stationed physically in that realm. I think it's a bit more complicated than that, but I think maybe that kind of gives a general idea. Yeah, so in other words, there's a connection between the karma that you have now, the mental state you have now, and then where you get reborn. These things kind of go together. This is basically what he's saying here. And then he says, and this is kind of interesting, he says thus, Ananda, for beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, karma is the field, consciousness is the seed, and craving is the moisture for the consciousness to be established in an inferior realm. In this way, there is the production of renewed existence in the future. So here, the Buddha starts off with this nice little phrase here, saying that for beings that are hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, hindered by ignorance, avijja, nivarana. Yeah, nivarana, you know the word nivarana, of course, the 5 hindrances. And avijja being here translated as ignorance. Ignorance is not maybe quite satisfactory, because what it means a lack of insight into the nature of the world. That's really what it means. And ignorance is too much concerned about lacking knowledge, like going to school and not being ignorant about the subject or whatever. So it is a bit like being not seeing things rightly, being deluded about existence is probably more correct in this case. So because we are deluded, because we don't understand the world properly, because we don't understand that there are higher levels of consciousness than what we are used to in our ordinary life, because we don't really understand the idea of rebirth and karma, because we don't get these things, we are moving in darkness. We don't really know what is going on around us. We don't understand the potential for a spiritual path, all these kind of things. One of those, the reality is that we are, the vast majority of people, we're completely enmeshed, completely immersed in the sensory realm. The sensory realm is all we know. You wake up in the morning and you start off by seeing things and hearing things, and then you go to bed at night, and all through the day, all we know is really that sensory realm around us. You travel abroad, you travel between different countries, you travel to wherever it is on this planet, and everywhere you go, you're still completely immersed in that sensory realm. You go to bed at night and you dream about that sensory realm. My goodness, there's no escape from that sensory realm. It is always around us, and so we think this is all there is. It is kind of a natural assumption, right? It's kind of course, this is all there is. But then you realize, actually, to get away from the sensory realm, you cannot travel anywhere. You can't kind of go to Mars or anything like that. That's what Elon Musk wants to do. He wants to go to Mars. It's not going to work, right? It's not going to get you out of the problem by going to Mars. But you realize the only way to get out of the sensory realm is to go within there. And that is actually where you can be escaped from the sensory realm is found. And that is where you understand that there is an alternative reality that is far more delightful, far more pleasant, far more real. Even it feels more real than the sensory realm. It feels more, this is it. If anything is real, it is this deeper meditation experience that you can have. And this is, this is the problem of ignorance. We don't really understand this potential there is for inner development of the mind and seeing things in a different way. We always look in the wrong place for meaning, for purpose, for the goals in life. The goals are always external in the sensory realm. No, There is no goal there. There is no purpose there. There is no aim. It's just more of the same. If you want a real goal, a real aim, a real purpose, you have to go within. That is where you find real meaning. So we're blinded by this because we have no idea that there is such a thing as a spiritual path that takes you to more meaningful, more powerful, more blissful, more real states of mind and corresponding existences. This is only the beginning of it, and then of course there is the whole idea of rebirth. And sometimes many of you may agree or may have confidence in the Buddhist ideas of rebirth. But of course, having confidence is one thing, and seeing it and reflecting on it, understanding what it actually entails, if it is true, is something very different. And so it is really worthwhile reflecting on what these ideas of rebirth actually mean in terms of how does that change your attitude to existence? How does it feel right now? It should be visceral. It should be a felt experience when you know that there is rebirth. Do you feel anything about with it? Or is it just an idea in your mind? And if it remains on the level of an idea, it is not going to have much power in your spiritual practice. I'm going to come back to a sutta later on, which is all about, which is called the paṭicca-samuppāda. It's one of my favorite suttas, and it is all about, actually every sutta is my favorite, but this is one of them, because it's a sutta. So it is all about the downside of the sensory existence. It's a very, to my mind, a very, very interesting sutta, because it makes it clear in a way that is very believable that sensory realm actually is very problematic. And from understanding that, you will also see that by contemplating this, it also brings in the idea of rebirth kind of through the back door. And then you understand how rebirth actually relates to this whole thing very nicely. We'll come back to this later on, but it will become more, I think it, to me anyway, this sutta is very interesting. It's worth a lot of reflection and contemplation to help one deeper in one's practice. So we are ignorant, we are clueless about reality. We're walking in darkness. We are stubbing our toes and hitting our heads on the beams, the kind of metaphorical beams of the world. Hit you kind of hurt yourself somewhere because you don't know where you're going. This is the suffering of life, where you kind of walk into things because you don't know what you're doing. This beautiful idea of when you become awakened. Awakening is always, in the suttas, it is always, the simile used for awakening is always light. The light gets turned on. You see what is happening. It's like turning on the light in the room. You don't stub your toes anymore. You don't hit your head against the rafters anymore, because you can see what is going on now. And it's kind of hard. It's very hard to understand that, to see that we are in darkness. The reason we can't see it, of course, is that, well, the reason we can't see it is because darkness begets darkness. You don't know where you are. From darkness comes more darkness. You have to have some confidence and faith in something to kind of start you on the way out. So we are hindered by ignorance. Ignorance blocks us from even starting this path. And fettered by craving. And fettered by craving means that on the one hand, we are blinded to what is going on. On the one hand, our existence, the reason why we exist, the reason why we carry on in samsaric realm, moving on from life to life, the reason for that is craving. Craving is the tie that ties you down, that fetters you to this continuation of rebirth. A fetter is like, in the old days, they had a ball and chain. If you were a prisoner, you had a ball and chain. That's kind of a fetter. You're fettered with these things. And so you're tied. This is what ties you to the world. And why is that? Well, because craving is about the future. So because craving is about the future, it like projects the mind into the future. And then you carry on as a consequence of that. And you don't stop. So your existence moves on. And craving and ignorance are very closely related to each other. If you overcome ignorance, you're no longer in darkness. And because you're no longer in darkness, you stop craving, because you realize craving was happiness in the first place? Why on earth did you crave? Happiness is to be found by not craving, by being peaceful in the here and now. Craving is going to get you nowhere. Craving is actually just another aspect of suffering. It is not just that craving leads to suffering. Craving itself is also an experience of suffering. First noble truth, not getting what you want, and being separated from the things you like, and being united with things that you don't like. These are all aspects of craving, and they are firmly mentioned in the first noble truth. So then you come out of this, and this whole thing ends as a consequence. Beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For these beings, karma is the field. So it's like now we are in the human realm. The human realm is almost like a field. You look out the human realm, and it's kind of this vast expanse in front of us. When you look out I have a little kuti at Bodhingala Monastery in Perth in Australia. I have this $1 million view. No, million euros, or million euro view. I had to get the currency right here. £1 million view for those who are not actually. Yes, you said pounds. I'm doing the UK. Okay. $1 million for those of you from America, and million kroners. I have more like 10 billion kroners for those of us from Norway. So, and the world looks like this flat expanse in front of you, because you're quite high up. I can look out. I can see the Indian Ocean in the distance. And kind of this big, it's like a field almost, And so this field is established in your mind, first of all, because that is where you kind of the default field where your mind hangs out. And then when you get reborn, it's like the consciousness is planted firmly in that field for one lifetime. One lifetime, the consciousness is stationed in that place. This is known as the stations of consciousness in the suttas. Vijnana titti is the public word for this. Your station, you have no choice. Once you're reborn as a human, you have to hang out in the human realm, at least physically, until you die, and you can move on to something else. So this is the field. Consciousness is stationed there, and while consciousness is stationed there, consciousness is the seed, karma is the field, craving is the moisture. So craving is what makes us do things in this realm. And as we do that, consciousness develops, it evolves. This is the moisture that makes it grow, is a metaphor, but it doesn't really grow in a sense of kind of having a particular direction or purpose. It's more like it develops in various directions, depending on the kind of craving you have. So if you have a craving for coming on Buddhist meditation retreats, and some of you obviously have that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Same for me, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have a craving to come here. So the craving gets us here, the consciousness grows according to that craving. And then your consciousness develops, and then the inner life starts to separate from your outer life, develops maybe to a higher realm, like I was talking about yesterday. The bhava, the existence is different. Your default mental world is at a higher level because you have been living really well, doing the right thing. You get reborn accordingly, and on it goes like this. You may have noticed I also have in parentheses there, I also put volition and aspiration. And the reason for that is because there is a parallel sutta that is exactly the same as this one, but it has volition and aspiration instead of consciousness. So this is just an alternative way of thinking about the mind. The other mind has all these aspects, and volition and aspiration are a very important aspect of the mind. So it's almost as if your will is established in that realm, and your will continues to develop according to whatever you do there. So in this way, there is a production of renewed existence in the future. Through this, the karma, and then the consciousness getting the seed, and then developing again, and on it goes, round and round. And then you get established in the inferior realm. The inferior realm is the karma dhatu. Dhatu is like, in this case, realm, often translated as element, but here the word element doesn't work. So you have the karma dhatu, the inferior realm. It's kind of It's kind of unpleasant, isn't it? We are living in the inferior realm. Have you ever thought about that? This is kind of usually we think of the animals as the inferior realm, but the Buddha says, no, this is the inferior realm, man. It's kind of it's a wake-up call, man. This is it. Yeah. Watch out, this is kind of bad news, and we need to do something about this. And it says something, again, about the potential for developing the mind out of this realm. So let's have a look at the other two realms that Buddha talks about here. If ananda, there were no karma ripening in the form realm, would form sphere existence be discerned? So the form realm is the realm equivalent to the four jhanas. They're called form realms, luminous form, because there is like the last remnant of form existence is to be found there. No one you would experience these things because there were no karma ripening there. Thus, ananda, for beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, karma or action is the field, consciousness is the seed, craving is the moisture for the consciousness or the volition aspirations to be established in a middling realm. In this way, there is production of renewed existence in the future. The jhana states are just the middling realm. So these are the most blissful experience that people normally have. Buddha calls them the middling realms. They are. The Buddha always sets the bar extremely high. The suttas, the bar is like really hard to clear. This bar is in the suttas. And coming to the last one, if ananda, there were no karma ripening in the formless realm, arupa lo dhatu, would formless sphere existence be discerned or be experienced? No one. Thus, ananda, for beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, karma is the field, consciousness the seed, and craving the moisture for the consciousness to be established in a superior realm. In this way, there is production of renewed existence in the future. It is in this way, ananda, that there is existence. So there you are. That is the idea of existence and how it then is a condition for rebirth or birth. One leading to the other, the close connection between the mental state of this life and where you can go in the future. So I think the idea of rebirth, that this is kind of the main idea of rebirth, but there's probably a little bit more to it as well. And there are the general state where one of the nice things in the sutta, the way I'm talking about this now is actually specifically mentioned in the suttas elsewhere. So, for example, they talk about how do you get reborn in the jhana realm. And then the way to get reborn in a jhana realm is not to experience a jhana state once. That is not enough. You may have it once and then you kind of forget about it. And you don't really forget about it because you never forget about these experiences. Because these are, someone said once, these are positive traumas. Trauma is something you can't forget, but usually we think about negative trauma. This is a positive trauma. You can't forget it because it's so powerful. It's a beautiful way of thinking about samadhi, positive trauma. But the idea, according to the suttas, is that you have to keep on practicing it. You have to keep on being attracted to the jhana state, having the ability to enter jhana at will. This is one of the characteristics of someone who is really skilled in meditation, to enter deep samadhi at will whenever you want to. And they have to keep that up. And if you keep it up in that way, then your mind is always inclining towards the jhana states, because we always incline towards the highest happiness that is available to us. If you have jhanas available to you, your mind will incline there. If you haven't got jhana available to you, then you will incline to whatever else is lesser. And if your mind is really kind of in the human realm, you will incline towards human food and human sense pleasures, which are considered kind of inferior according to this. So you will incline towards those things where you find the most happiness. So you have to, if you have that access when you die, you will get reborn automatically because your mind will just go there. It will incline towards that realm, and you will go there when you pass away. So this idea that the mind state you have and the kind of default of the mind takes you to that kind of rebirth is actually what you find in the sutras. It's not something that I'm just making up for kind of randomly or anything like that. So that is essentially how it goes. And of course, when you are peaceful and quiet in meditation, you can normally know roughly where that mind is and where you are inclining. And sometimes it may be a bit more complicated than that. It may be that there are things that you have done, for example, that maybe you have repressed a little bit, and then in your dying process, they will come back to you. And then they will affect how you get reborn. This may also happen because karma is this vast field. You don't really know exactly how it's going to play out when you die. Yeah, so you want to minimize the risk, minimize the bad karma, maximize the mind's kind of positive default state. And then you are, so there are a few things like that are also coming to play. And you may remember there's a very nice sutta that talks about this, the Maha-Kamma-Vimala Sutta, Majjhima 136. Yeah, you may be aware of that sutta. There's two Kamma-Vimala suttas. Vimala means analysis, and Kamma is action, analysis of action. And 135 and 136 is the middle-length sayings of the Buddha. And one is a very simple sutta that shows the relationship between our actions and the results. And the other one is a more profound sutta that shows how complex the working out of karma can be, and how it is possible to live really well. And if you are unlucky, you can be reborn in a bad destination, even if you live well. And that is kind of the thing, something from the past, the deep past kind of emerges at your deathbed and then takes you in the wrong direction. Yeah, if you have done something in your life and suddenly you feel guilty when you die, oh no, I will repress this all the time. Now it's coming back to me. So this is kind of a slightly worrying thing about the dying process, right? Is that you can never be 100% sure. Well, actually you can. If you have very deep samadhi, you can be pretty sure, and if you have access to that. But there's always a kind of trickiness to the mind, especially if your mind is not very developed. There is possibilities there that are not very nice to think of. So the path is urgent. Now is time to practice. Yeah, no thinking about the future, what you're gonna do after you finish this retreat. Oh yeah, then I'm gonna eat in the afternoon. Yeah. It's a common thing, right? I mean, I feel a bit sorry for all of you. I have a bit of compassion for you because I know that as a layperson, you always have a meal in the evening. Maybe not all of you, but many of you will have a meal in the evening. Then suddenly you have to live for 10 days without a meal in the evening. Of course, you're going to think about that meal. How can you not think about that meal? It's really high. For me, I don't never think about a meal in the evening. Yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years or whatever. And after 30 years, finally you forget about that meal. Actually, you forget about it before 30 years, long before that. So it becomes natural. It becomes kind of second nature when you are a monastic. But for you guys, cheapness is difficult. Yeah, so I have a bit of compassion for you now. So remember that the way to overcome this is basically just to know that maybe there is no future meal. Yeah, maybe you're going to die in the meantime. Yeah, maybe you're going to be dead before lunch. Okay, so why on earth waste time thinking about that meal? This is one way of dealing with that. So I should maybe say that one of the things people misunderstand a lot, this idea when we talk about senses restraint in Buddhism. Not to enjoy sensual pleasures. What does that actually mean? And people get it wrong and think I should not enjoy my food. I should not enjoy the ordinary things around me in the world. But that actually is the wrong way to think about it. If you don't enjoy your food, if you don't enjoy a good night's sleep, if you don't enjoy the basic things that's to keep us alive and make us function in this world, you're going to have a miserable life. Yeah, it's as simple as that, because these are part and parcel of our human existence. And especially, maybe if you have really, really deep samadhi, then you may kind of don't have to enjoy the food so much. But the fact is, if you have really, really deep samadhi, you are going to enjoy your food even more. Isn't that kind of paradoxical? It's one of the strange paradoxes of the suttas, that you have to give up the desire for sensual pleasures. And then, by giving that up, you achieve deep samadhi. When you come out of the samadhi, those sensual pleasures are more delightful than ever before. Isn't that weird? And of course, the reason why they are delightful is precisely because you have given up craving. Craving stops us from actually experiencing things properly because we're not really in the present. You notice when you eat, you're always kind of on the next food, before you finish the present one. You know what it's like? We're never really with what we're doing. When craving is completely gone, you get the full taste of what you're eating. So actually, you enjoy the food more, but you don't crave for it. It's kind of really strange how these things work. So please enjoy your meals. When you enjoy your meals properly, you eat the right amount, then there's actually less chance you will fantasize about food in the afternoon or in the evening, because you have had a good meal, you have enjoyed it, it's out of the way. That is really what we should be worried about, is kind of the fantasizing about food. And that is the problem. That is when you have an attachment. The attachment is not in the actual eating of the meal. That is okay. The attachment is in how your mind generally, if it revolves around eating and these kind of things, that is where there is a problem. So it's important to understand, get these things right, because very often people become really silly in their pursuit of the spiritual path. There are some horror stories about this. I'm not here to tell you horror stories. So we tend to want horror stories. There's enough of that in the world already, so we leave those aside. So anyway, so getting these things right matters enormously. But now let us come back to the Mahanidana Sutta again. And but before we do that, I'm going to have some of that nice coffee that Marie has very kindly brought up for me. Wait, go away. Okay. Okay, so having looked at how continued existence is the condition for birth or rebirth, we're going to go one step back. We're going to ask for the next condition, which is the condition for continued existence, which, as we have seen, is grasping. The Pali word is upadana. And upadana literally means something like taking up. You pick something up, you take it up. And after taking it up, you hold on to it, you grasp it, you attach to it. So all of these things are aspects of upadana, the literal, the taking up, and the holding on and the attachment to it afterwards is all part and parcel of this. So the Buddha then says, he carries on, he says, grasping is the condition for continued existence. That's what I said. And this is a way to understand how this is so. Suppose there were totally and utterly no grasping for anyone, anywhere. That is, grasping at sensual pleasures, grasping at views, grasping at precepts and observances, and grasping at theories of the self. When there's no grasping at all, but the cessation of grasping, would continued existence still be found? No, certainly. That is why this is the cause, this is the source, this is the origin, this is the condition for continued existence, namely grasping. So grasping, again, is this idea of picking things up. And when I say picking things up, I mean that both in the literal and the metaphorical sense. You literally pick things up. When I pick up the coffee, that's grasping at coffee. That means I live in the coffee realm for a while and continue existence in the coffee realm. And I wouldn't recommend that realm all that much, to be honest, but it's kind of handy to get a bit of extra energy sometimes. But then that is a literal picking up and grasping of things. Then there's the metaphorical picking up, which is much more important. That is where we pick up views. We pick up ideas, we pick up theories, we pick up observances, we pick up precepts. Yeah, picking up precepts is also part of this. We pick up attachment to things in the world around us. You don't actually literally pick up a house, but you attach to the house, you pick it up in a metaphorical sense as well. The metaphorical sense is really the most important part here of this grasping. And then once you pick it up, you tend to hold on to these things because they are important to you. It's a response to craving, which you'll see later on, that craving is the source for this grasping. And over a lifetime, we start out as a child maybe, and then as we develop and we become older and older, we kind of start to get it's almost as if we get a hold on the world gets a hold on us. Yeah? We grasp more and more things. We develop attachments and graspings in life as we grow older. Yeah? From the very beginning, we have some idea maybe of sexual pleasures. But then as we go older, we build up this whole kind of all this variety of things that we do, that we grasp onto to make sure we can satisfy the sensory desire that we may have. Yeah? So in that realm of sexual pleasures, one thing that we have, obviously, one of them is having a partner in life. Yeah? Partner, many reasons for having a partner, but it is in the sensory realm. And it kind of helps us to satisfy, you don't get too lonely, and it satisfies all kinds of pleasures in all kinds of ways. Then there is having a house. Yeah? Having a house or a home is also a way of satisfying the sensory realm. Having a house means that you have a place of safety. You can lock your front door, keep the burglars out, yeah? Or keep out other people. You have a place where you can retire from the world. You have a good night's sleep, or you can have some entertainment where you have your meals. Yeah? So having a home is a very important thing to enable you to enjoy the sensual pleasures of the world. So grasping at a house, and of course at a job, a job is what allows you to pay your bills and pay for that home. And all of these things are things we grasp at in the world. And you can start to see, once you have a family or a partner in life, you have a home that you live in, you have a job that you work at, suddenly your life starts to seem pretty full. There isn't really much time for much beyond that. Sometimes I speak to my brother. My brother has 2 kids and a wife, and I says, I've got time for nothing else. And then he has a job, but this is my whole life. And I don't work, I drive my kids around everywhere, yeah, to do sports or whatever. And this is my whole life is about these things. So once you have these things, your life has taken a certain shape according to the things that you grasp. And then your mind revolves around those things. You think about those things because they are important. When you sit down in meditation to finally get quiet, you can't help but think about your kids, about your partner, about your job, about all the problems that you have to resolve, about what is happening in your house at home. Have any of you ever thought about those things in meditation? It would be a bleeding miracle if you hadn't thought about those things, right? This is just the way it has to be, because these are the things that matter to us. So of course, you're going to think about those things in meditation. And that shows you how we grasp onto things leads to your mind thinking about them, revolving in them. It's like your consciousness is stuck in those things. It becomes the default of your mind. Yeah? So your continued existence is there. And then, of course, you get reborn accordingly. So you can always know what is important in your life, what you are attached to, by simply observing your mind in meditation. Where does it tend to go? And then you start to do other things. Yeah, you come to a Buddhist retreat, and you start, and going to a Buddhist retreat is a little bit like being grasping onto precepts and observances. Yeah, this is kind of an observance to go to a Buddhist retreat. We observe a particular way of life. This is what is meant by observance. It means a particular way of doing things. So we observe this way of life, and we take certain precepts. And we took the 8 precepts to begin with. So we take precepts, and we kind of, these things become important to us, and we grasp onto these things. Yeah. Is it wrong to grasp onto these things? Is grasping bad? we're normally told in Buddhism that attachment and grasping is bad. Yeah, this is kind of how we kind of think as Buddhists think about the world. But actually, it is not as simple as that. Because remember, as long as you have a sense of self, you have no choice. You have to grasp, because grasping is what the sense of self does. We have a sense of self, we feel that we exist in a certain way, and that sense of self leaches into the world, it goes into the world, because our identity, our sense of self is tied up with the world around us, with the people around us, our nationality, our job, and all of these kind of things. Yeah, so having a sense of self means you will grasp at things. So it's not as simple as to say, I should not be grasping, because if you tell yourself, I should not be grasping, all you do is feel guilty, because you're guaranteed that you're going to grasp at things. You have no choice in the matter. So the right way to think about grasping is not to say grasping or not grasping. It is to kind of try to move on, to grasp at things that are more useful. Yeah, and this is why coming here and grasping a little bit at your precepts, grasping a little bit at the idea of doing meditation practice is not a bad thing, because if you do it well, it's going to lead you forward on the path. And so you loosen your grasping of the bad things a little bit. Yeah, you steal a little bit less. You kill less people, right? That kind of thing. So you give up those bad things. You stop killing insects, for example, right? You stop those kind of bad things and you move on to the positive things. You have a little bit less interest in the sensory world, because you start to realize the sensory world actually is out of control. Why am I so interested in the sensory world anyway? Yeah, and it's like a wake-up call when the sensory world goes down, goes down the drain, as it does sometimes. It's a wake-up call for every one of us, realizing actually there is no refuge there, there's no grasp there. If you grasp there, you're asking for trouble. You're just going to hurt yourself if you do that. And so you grasp at something higher, and that higher is initially keeping precepts. Yeah, being kind. You grasp at the idea of being kind. If you don't grasp at the idea of being kind, you're going to do bad things, because that is the natural state of the mind. Sometimes the mind wants to do bad things, sometimes it wants to do good things. And unless you have a commitment to kindness, you're not going to be able to be kind all the time. You have to have a commitment to it. That's what grasping means. That's what attachment means. So some degree of attachment to this actually is important. And then as you climb, it's like a ladder of attachment. Yeah, you let go of some of the lower rungs and grasp onto some of the higher rungs, and you climb the ladder of attachment. And as you go up this ladder, the grip you have is less and less and less as you go up. The grip lessens. You don't have to attach as strongly as you go higher up. And then you gradually change your mind. Your mind becomes more wholesome, and then there is less need for grasping as you get used to the idea. You get used to this being kind at all times after a while. So grasping is okay. Yeah, well, it's not that it's okay, but we have no choice. We have to kind of do things in the right way and think about these things in a way that actually works, rather than having unattainable goals or never grasping at anything. So, but be careful, yeah? And sometimes people think, okay, I keep the 5 precepts, I'm a good Buddhist, and you think that's the end of the story. Yeah? But that is also the wrong way of thinking. That's when you're grasping things in the wrong way. Yeah? Remember, this is a path. It's a path where we always want to improve, we always want to move further, because there is a real goal to be reached. Yeah? You don't want to kind of be stuck where you are. And so you don't want to grasp onto the 5 precepts so firm and think that's all there is to it. There's more to it, of course. That's why the idea of kindness is much more useful, because kindness, being fully kind, really isn't fulfilled until you become at least a noble person, Aryan. Yeah, so if you think of kindness instead, you're always moving towards a goal that is kind of always kind of stretching you a little bit. Because being kind at all times, even in your thinking mind, it's quite difficult. It's not difficult as such, but it takes training. It takes an overcoming of bad habits from the past. So you attach in the right way, yeah, with a degree of flexibility. Yeah? Sometimes people attach to meditation practice. They think, yeah, I'm a Buddhist, I must meditate every day. Yeah? And so they sit down and they kind of, every day they kind of, nod and they fall asleep and the things don't really work out. And then they do this and they carry on like this and they never really consider whether they are actually doing the right thing or not. They do it because they think as a Buddhist, I must meditate. But that is the wrong way of doing meditation practice. The way to do meditation practice, if it isn't giving the results that you're supposed to get, being peaceful, feeling a sense of joy, overcoming the hindrances in the mind, if it doesn't do that, you need to ask yourself, why doesn't it do it? Why am I not making progress? Just sitting down and doing meditation because you are a Buddhist and because you are grasping onto these observances, meditation then becomes an observance that you grasp onto. It's good to grasp onto it a little bit, but do it in the right way, not as an automatic thing that you just do without further reflection. So the right way of grasping onto meditation as an observance is to always ensure that it actually does what it's supposed to do. Yeah? And if it doesn't work for you at all, then let it go for a while and come back to it further down the track. If you have to choose between whether you should live a life of kindness or meditate, if of course there is no such choice, but if that was the choice, you should always choose a life of kindness, because that is the foundation for everything else. And even if you just live a life of kindness all the time, when eventually you come to sit down and to watch your breath or whatever, it will work. You will have good results because you have put in the causes that make meditation possible. But if you just meditate and then you don't actually fulfill the other factors of the path, you can meditate for 10 years. And after 10 years, nothing has really happened. It hasn't gotten you anywhere. There was an example I heard recently. There was this person this was in Australia, and I think it was a she or he, whatever, doesn't matter. There was someone who had been meditating for 10 years, and they had decided those 10 years I'm not going to watch television because television is just a nuisance when you meditate, just a distraction. So no watching of television for 10 years, is meditating all the time. And then after 10 years, this person decided to watch television again. I don't know if they had never watched television, it's hard to imagine, but okay, so now we're going to watch television again. And then they said that when they started watching television again, they were addicted to television, bang, like that, addiction straight away. And this is the problem. The problem there is that even though they had been meditating all along, they hadn't been developing the other things that make you come out of those addictions to the things of the world. We are addicted to the world because we still have suffering inside. Addiction is usually a response to suffering. And the reason why she got addicted to television was because she still had some suffering inside, and she probably hadn't been purifying her mind enough through the other aspects of the path, just meditating in a little bit of a blind kind of way. So if you have to choose kindness any time of meditation practice. And if your meditation doesn't work properly, take a break. Reset things a little bit. Don't just go blindly about these things, because then they become empty observances that don't really get you anywhere on the path. So you do the meditation in the right way. You enjoy meditation, and you start to become peaceful. And whenever you sit down, your mind kind of goes in that direction, and you exist in that particular realm. So your attachment to that particular observance lead to a particular kind of existence. Views, and we did talk about views yesterday because there was a question about views, how it relates to existence. So you have views about yourself, views about the world, and your mind revolves around those views because we have an interest in those views, in those ways of looking at the world. You think about yourself, ideas about yourself, who you are, theories about these things, and our sense of identity needs to be reinforced all the time. Otherwise, it kind of disappears out of the window. one of the beautiful things about deep meditation is that your identity tends to fade away. You don't not anyone anymore. You don't really identify as anything anymore. And identity fades away. You don't have a nationality in deep meditation. You don't have a gender in deep meditation. You're neither rich nor poor in deep meditation. You're neither educated nor uneducated in deep meditation. It's like you go into this universal field of mind that is the same for everyone. And there's something very beautiful about giving up identity. There's something very powerful about that. It's a kind of liberating. You realize how you are in this straitjacket. Yeah, I am this, and it kind of your little small world where what I am. And giving that up is actually it frees you up somehow. And you feel that you're no longer kind of narrowed down to this particular individual with certain characteristics and a certain identity. So this is part of the liberation of the path, giving up your identity. And again, it's a very useful thing to do in terms also of the death process, because when eventually you have to die, also a large part of your identity has to go. When you die, all you really take with you are the qualities of your heart. You have the goodness that you have built up, but the rest of your identity, most of it anyway, is tied down to this life and this world, and it has to go. You can no longer live in that identity. So these are some of the ways in which your grasping then leads to a kind of continued existence. So let's go on and then go back one more step back. Okay, so the next step back is craving is the condition for grasping. That's what I said. And this is a way to understand how this is so. Suppose there were totally and utterly no craving for anyone, anywhere, for anyone or anything, anywhere. That is craving for sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts. When there is no craving at all, with the cessation of craving, would grasping still be found? Would it still be experienced? No, sir. That is why this is the cause, the source, the origin, the condition of grasping, namely craving. So here we have the 6 kinds of craving. Craving is here divided into 6 categories, the last one being thoughts. And that really means all mental content, all phenomena of the mind, not just thoughts in a kind of coarse sense, but anything experienceable by the mind is really included in that. So this is the cause of this taking things up, of grasping onto things. And I've already kind of explained this already in a certain way, because when we have craving for the world to enable us to experience those things, to enable us to kind of have a controlled environment where we can kind of enjoy the pleasures of the world, we grasp onto all of these things to kind of make that world possible. We can enjoy these things like a house, like a relationship, like a job, and then down the track like Buddhism. We grasp onto Buddhism because we think Buddhism is going to give you some degree of happiness. That's why people are Buddhists, right? Or on the spiritual path, because they think it will give us happiness. That's the only real reason for it. So we grasp onto that. And it's a good kind of grasping. So please grasp onto the idea, Buddhist ideas. And so all of these things, we hold on to these things because they then satisfy the kind of the cravings get satisfied through that grasping. So craving naturally leads to holding on to things in the world. And one of the interesting things, I want to kind of maybe emphasize this again, and this is this idea of why it is we grasp at theories of a self, or why we grasp at views. Now, views here Upadana in the Pali refers really to views that have to do with spiritual practice and religious practice, not to worldly views, not to political views, like those kind of things, or views about which sport team is the best one, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So why is this so important? And the reason why this is kind of how this works and why this matters is that and this kind of shows you the root cause of the problem of our existence in a very powerful way. It feels like we exist, because it feels like you exist. If someone tells you that you exist in a very solid and real way, and you will carry on to exist after you die, then that philosophy, that theory will feel good to you, because it matches with the craving you have to exist in the first place, the idea that you exist in a certain way. And because it matches with that theory will feel good to you. And because it feels good to you, it is very likely you will take it up as your theory of life. And if someone believes in a creator God, like I'm very committed to Christianity or to Islam or to any other kind of theistic religion, because they're very committed, that they very often they become very blind to that. They can be blind as a Buddhist, of course, as well. It doesn't really, it really depends how you practice Buddhism. But once you are committed to a certain view, you can become very blind to anything else, because it affirms a certain feeling and experience that we already have. It feels good to us. And this is, to me, is so fascinating, the idea that we take up views based on feelings. This kind of is the way the world often is. We think of ourselves as rational beings. I believe in Buddhism because I'm rational, right? Is that why you are Buddhist? Because you are rational? This makes sense. This is how we like to think about things. It is sensible now. And someone asked me yesterday why I am a Buddhist monk, right? And I said, go and read that little booklet that is available online, so please do that. But in that booklet, I make the case that the reason I'm a Buddhist monk, the reason is because I was a Buddhist monk in a past life. That's the reason I'm a Buddhist monk. It's a habit. That's why I'm a Buddhist monk. It's a good habit, right? I mean, I must admit, of all habits, you can't do much better than being a Buddhist monk or Buddhist nun or whatever. So it's a good habit, but still, I think it's just a habit. That is a really nice way of thinking about things. It takes out so much of that ego, so much of the sense of self. I used to think I was really clever, that's why I was a Buddhist. Until I realized actually it got nothing to do with cleverness at all. It's just this habit from the past carrying on into the future. So we need this habit. And once you start to realize that the reason why we have views comes from feelings, and then after having the feeling that this is good, then comes the rationality that supports the feelings. That is kind of when the whole thing starts to fall apart a little bit. You start to realize that these views aren't really worth what they thought they were worth. They're not as solid as you think they are. The same is actually true, of course, of political views as well. Any views you have, they are far less solid than we tend to think. They're far more slippery than we tend to think. They're based on something which is actually can change so fast. If it is based on feelings, and we know how unreliable feelings are, suddenly you feel different, and then your views will change accordingly because of that. That is what you start to realize. And then you take your views much less seriously. And when you take your views less seriously, you have less arguments in life, right? You don't sit down and argue about religion and politics so much. But you're not supposed to do that in good company anyway, but that's what we do because it's good fun to argue about religion and politics. So we don't take it so serious anymore. You realize how slippery it is, how uncertain it is, and how it is based on something that is far less solid than we actually usually care to admit. And then things kind of, life becomes much better as a consequence. So, does this feel good to you, what I'm saying? Uncertain. Okay, well, if it does feel good, then I'm going to stop anyway. So if it feels bad, then yay, he's going to stop. Hooray! If it feels good, then I'm going to come back later on and torture you a bit and kind of give you some more of that good feeling. So For now, I'm going to stop it. We have kind of come to quite a nice point. I'm going to do a little bit more on the sequence of dependent origination, and then we're going to make a detour, and we're going to discuss in quite a bit of detail the connection between feeling and craving, because this is a very important point, and so much of the path actually exists right then in that point. It's all about sense restraint and these kind of things, and it's very important to get these things right. So we're going to talk about that, discuss that in quite a bit of length. But for now, I wish you a marvelous lunch. Please don't forget to enjoy your food. And then we'll have the meditation again at 2 o'clock, and we'll continue with the suttas this evening at 6 o'clock. Okay, that's it for now.